We're going to look at a set of drills here that cover all of the weak verbs that we have studied so far. That would be the 1, 2, and 3 gutturals, and then 1 and 3 aleph verbs. We remember our imperfect rules over here. If you memorize the little jingle, yit, yit, ya, yo, Hebrew, Hebrew, go, 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 however you want to put it, this gives you the strong verb prefix vowels for the imperfects. What we're going to see is that every once in a while with weak verbs we will have to revisit these and check to see whether any changes have taken place to those prefix vowels and other vowels as well. As we move through, we'll see possible changes to our R1, R2, and R3 vowels. Let's look at number 1 here, ta'avod. Now, initially you look at this and it looks like it should be a hiphil imperfect. You have the tav prefix and a patach, and then under the R1 letter we have a half vowel. It happens to be a compound schwa, but it's a half vowel, and that would also be characteristic of a hiphil with an R1 guttural. But notice that we could also have a kal, the reason being that with this half vowel, the normal hirik that goes under the tav bumps up against this half vowel, this half a, this hatef patach, and when short vowels bump up against half vowels, they tend to take the short vowel that corresponds to the half vowel. And so we would get ta'a. So this technically could be a hiphil imperfect with a true patach as its prefix vowel, or it could be a kal imperfect with a reflected phony patach that's just there because of the compound schwa next to it. How do we tell the difference? Well, in this case we have to look at the theme vowel. Our theme vowel is a holum, and in the hiphil imperfects your theme vowel will always be EI class. Now if you remember, we have 3 classes of vowels. So we have the A class vowels, we have the EI class vowels, and we have the OU class vowels. And when a vowel lengthens or shortens, it almost always does it within its class. So when a patach lengthens, it lengthens to a kametz. When a hirik or a sagol lengthens, they lengthen to typically to a sere, a long E. When a short O, a kametz hatuf, or a short U, a kibbutz lengthens, they often lengthen to a holum. This provides a little bit of review for us if we haven't thought about our vowel classes in a while. We have A class, EI class, OU class. Here we see an O class theme vowel, and of course our kal can have O class or possibly an A class theme vowel if that third root letter is a guttural. But a kal will not typically have an EI class theme vowel in the imperfect. So we look at this, we see this O class theme vowel. This means that we are looking at a kal, not a hiphil. So we're looking at a kal, imperfect, 2 ms or 3 fs. The tav tells us, with no ending, the tav tells us that it's a 2 ms or a 3 fs. This is for avad, our root, and it means you or she will serve. Okay, and so this is a case where we have what looks like a hiphil because it's a prefix with a patach, but it turns out that it's not a true patach, it's a reflected patach that comes about because of this ayin R1 guttural. So we have an R1 guttural, and we have this hatef patach because the guttural doesn't take a silent schwa. It gets reflected back and turns that normal hirik into a patach. So cal imperfect 2ms or 3fs of avad. Now the next one, we see again our root is amad. We see an imperfect prefix, this time a yod, and we see the patach. We need to ask ourselves, is this a true hifil with a true patach underneath it, or is it a cal with a reflected patach? Because we have, again, we have this R1 letter with a half A, with this hatef patach that possibly could be reflecting and turning this original hirik to a patach. So again, we need to look at the theme vowel. In this case, notice that the theme vowel is a hirik yod, EI class. Of course, the hirik yod is classic hifil. We barely need to think about that one. And so what we have is, we have a hifil this time, hifil imperfect, and it's got a yod prefix, which tells us third masculine, and no ending, tells us third masculine singular, of amad, and that would just be he will cause to stand. Perhaps he will confirm. So there are two examples of prefix vowels that are the same with R1 gutturals, but the theme vowel tells us in the first case it's a cal, in the second case that it is a hifil. Let's take a look at another one here. We see number 3, ya'azvu. Again, we have what looks like potentially a hifil because of our prefix vowel is a patach with one of our imperfect prefixes. But one thing that we know about a hifil is that the theme vowel of a hifil never reduces. So we have the theme vowel here reducing. It can't be a hifil. Our only other choice is a cal, where the vowel has been changed because of a half vowel. Notice here that two things have happened. In the normal strong form, we have here yiktol, and under the R1 letter, we have a schwa. For the corresponding form, again a 3ms form here, cal imperfect, where the R1 is a guttural, we change that R1 vowel to a compound schwa because the gutturals don't like any kind of a simple schwa, either silent or vocal, and that also changes our first vowel to a patach. We saw that in number 1. But now notice what happens when we add a vocalic ending, in this case the u ending for the masculine plural, and we have ya, and then we have a vocal schwa here under the zayin, and then vu. So ya azvu, but we can't have two vocal schwas next to each other. What happens is that this first vocal schwa has to be elevated to its corresponding short vowel, and so it becomes a patach. So we have patach, patach, and that's how we end up with this form here. The way that we can tell it's not a hifil, however, is because the theme vowel reduces, and so it has to be a cal. The hifil will never reduce a theme vowel. It will almost always be a tseri or a hirik yod in the imperfects and the imperfect derivatives. And so this is how we tell that this is a cal imperfect third masculine plural, and our root is azav, to forsake, and so ya'azavu, they will forsake. That's how we would translate that. Let's move on to number 4. We have techashev. This is a little bit easier to deal with because when we see what looks like a prefix with a tseri underneath it, this doesn't match any of our other prefix vowels, and if it did lengthen, it lengthened from a hirik. And so remember the EI class vowels over here. The tseri lengthens from a hirik or a sagol. An aleph prefix can have a sagol, but we have a tav prefix here. So an original tav with a hirik lengthened to a tseri. So originally, We need to use our imagination here. Originally we had a tav with a hirik, and what is it that caused it to lengthen? Well, the guttural in R1 would have rejected doubling, and so this seri tells us that there was doubling. This chet was doubled. We can't double it, but I'm just going to put that there because we're using our imagination. And then we have a comets underneath that. All of those put together give us a nifal. So we have a nifal stem here. Nifal imperfect. Originally looked like this. The guttural rejected the dagesh forte and lengthened the vowel from a hirik to its seri. So when we see a seri underneath a prefix consonant, and then we see a comets as the R1 vowel, we're looking at a nifal imperfect. So nifal imperfect, and then the tav prefix with no ending tells us either 2ms or 3fs, and our root is chashav. You will be reckoned, you will be accounted, or she will be reckoned, she will be accounted. It's a passive of the kal, which is to reckon, to account, to plan. So let's move on to number 5. Here we have ha'avarta. Ha'avarta. Now this is a case where we see the hey prefix with the patach, and that's making us think very possibly hiphil. Here we recognize our root fairly quickly as avar. It's very helpful to know your vocabulary, by the way, because it helps you pick out these roots. And so this hey with a patach prefix would normally be telling us something below the imperfects in the chart. So hiphil, imperative, infinitive. But before we think that it's a hiphil, imperative, or infinitive, note the R1 vowel. The R1 vowel here is a guttural, and it has a hataf patach. And so it's possible then that this is not a true patach like a imperative or infinitive would have, but it's a reflected patach from the compound shwa. Moving further, we look and we see, oh, we have a perfect suffix here. And so what it looks like has happened here is that this hey was originally a hirik for a hiphil perfect, and it got converted to a patach because of its bumping up against a compound shwa, this hatef patach. And the perfect ending verifies that it's a hiphil perfect. And so we have, rather than a hiphil infinitive or imperative, we have a hiphil perfect first common singular. That's the first common singular ending of avar. And that would be I caused to pass over, or I overlooked.